Picture this, a remote airstrip in Tizamín, Mexico. Dawn is breaking over cracked concrete and rusted hangars. A cargo plane touches down, carrying $5.3 million in cartel cash. Three men wait beside a white van, ready to complete what should be a routine money transfer. The pilot, Miguel Santos, 34 years old, former Mexican Air Force, has made this run dozens of times. Same route, same procedure, same brutal employer who kills people for being 15 minutes late. But today is different. As Miguel and his two childhood friends begin loading the money into their van, Miguel's phone buzzes. A text message. No words. Just a photo. On the screen, his wife Elena, bound, terror in her eyes. The follow-up message is simple. We know what you're planning. 5.3 million plus 1 million penalty. You have 36 hours. Try anything clever, and she dies slowly. Miguel stares at the phone, his hands shaking. His perfect plan, months of preparation, careful timing, trusted friends, has been compromised before it even began. But how did Miguel get to this moment? How did a decorated military pilot become a cartel thief with his wife's life hanging in the balance? To understand that, we need to go back 3 hours earlier, to 8,000 feet above the Mexican countryside, where Miguel Santos was about to commit his first murder. Before I walk you through the full story, I just have a small favor to ask. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and let me know in the comments what city are you watching from. It's always amazing to see how far this audience is reaching. Now, let's get back to the story. The 14th of February, 2024, 6:47 a.m., 8,000 feet above the Gulf of Mexico. Miguel Santos sat in the pilot's seat of a modified Cessna 208 Caravan, flying northwest toward what he believed would be his last day as a cartel employee. Behind him, secured in the cargo compartment, sat $5.3 million in cash money collected from drug sales throughout Central America. Beside him in the co-pilot seat, Victor Reyes, a cartel enforcer with dead eyes and a reputation for creative violence. Miguel had planned every detail of this robbery for 5 months. Every contingency, every backup plan, every possible complication. What he hadn't planned for was Victor's unexpected announcement 30 minutes into the flight. Victor mentioned casually that he'd been instructed to watch Miguel carefully during this flight. There had been reports of unusual activity around the airfield, and the cartel's security team was concerned about potential infiltration by law enforcement. Miguel's blood turned to ice. Someone had betrayed his plan. But he was already airborne with $5.3 million and a violent criminal who might kill him at any moment. Turning back wasn't an option. Miguel made a decision that would haunt him forever. He would kill Victor and continue with the robbery. The cockpit of the Cessna was cramped, barely 6 feet wide, with Victor sitting close enough to grab Miguel's throat if he suspected anything. Miguel needed a weapon that was both accessible and deadly, something that wouldn't alert Victor to his intentions. The emergency oxygen mask was secured in a compartment beside Miguel's left elbow. Its elastic cord was designed to stretch, which meant it could constrict around a person's neck with enough force to cut off blood flow to the brain. Miguel waited for the perfect moment. Victor was studying a map of their destination, his attention focused away from Miguel's movements. The cockpit noise would mask any small sounds Miguel might make. While maintaining level flight with his right hand, Miguel slowly opened the oxygen mask compartment with his left. The elastic cord was exactly where he remembered it, coiled and ready. But as Miguel's fingers closed around the cord, Victor noticed the motion in his peripheral vision. The enforcer's head snapped up, his eyes locking onto Miguel's face with sudden suspicion. "What are you doing?" Miguel had perhaps 2 seconds before Victor drew the .45 caliber pistol holstered under his jacket. 2 seconds to act or die. Miguel yanked the oxygen cord with both hands and spun in his seat, abandoning control of the aircraft. The plane immediately began to pitch and roll as Miguel looped the cord around Victor's neck. What followed was 90 seconds of the most intense violence Miguel had ever experienced. Victor was younger, stronger, and trained in close-quarters combat. But Miguel had the advantage of surprise and desperation. The cord around Victor's neck prevented him from calling out or breathing properly, but it didn't stop him from fighting back. Victor's first response was to reach for his pistol, but the cord around his neck made it impossible to aim properly. His shot went wide, shattering the side window and sending glass fragments throughout the cockpit. Miguel maintained his grip on the cord while trying to control Victor's gun hand. The enforcer's struggles were sending the aircraft into an uncontrolled descent, alarms blaring as they lost altitude. Victor managed to grab Miguel's hair with his free hand, slamming his head against the instrument panel. Blood streamed from Miguel's forehead, partially blinding him, but he held onto the cord. The fight continued as the plane spiraled toward the ocean. Victor's face was turning purple from lack of oxygen, but his military training kept him fighting even as consciousness faded. With his last conscious breath, Victor triggered the emergency door release lever beside his seat. The cockpit door burst open with explosive force, equalizing pressure and creating a hurricane of wind inside the cabin. Loose papers, equipment, and debris were sucked out into the void. Miguel felt Victor's body being pulled toward the open door by the rushing air. He tried to maintain his grip on the cord, but the wind force was overwhelming. Victor's unconscious body was torn from Miguel's grasp and sucked out of the aircraft, disappearing into the clouds 8,000 feet below. Miguel stared at the empty co-pilot seat, his hands shaking as he fought to regain control of the aircraft. Warning lights flashed across the instrument panel. The altimeter showed they dropped to 6,200 feet and were still descending. The struggle with Victor had damaged multiple flight controls. The hydraulic pressure was dropping, making the controls heavy and unresponsive. The broken window was creating aerodynamic drag that affected the plane's stability. Miguel had never anticipated having to fly a damaged aircraft while executing a robbery. His military training had prepared him for emergency situations, but not while covered in blood and traumatized by committing his first murder. It took Miguel 3 minutes to stabilize the aircraft and begin climbing back to cruising altitude. 3 minutes during which he wasn't sure if the plane would hold together or break apart in midair. But as Miguel regained control, he realized that Victor's death had solved several problems. There was no longer a guard who might alert the cartel to his betrayal. The broken window and damaged controls could be explained as the result of an accident, providing cover for his theft. Most importantly, Miguel had crossed the psychological barrier that separated planning a crime from committing one. He'd killed a man with his bare hands and felt nothing but relief that the threat was eliminated. Miguel began implementing the electronic countermeasures he'd prepared for this moment. With Victor's body falling toward the Gulf of Mexico, Miguel activated the first phase of his electronic deception. The Cessna's GPS tracking system was connected to the cartel's operations center through a satellite uplink that transmitted the aircraft's location every 60 seconds. Miguel needed to disable this system without alerting ground control to any malfunction. Using a tablet computer hidden beneath his seat, Miguel accessed the aircraft's navigation system through a back door that Diego had helped him install months earlier. The interface looked like a routine diagnostic screen, but it actually provided complete control over the plane's electronic signature. Miguel's first step was creating a false flight path. Instead of showing his actual location above the Gulf of Mexico, the GPS system would transmit coordinates, indicating that the aircraft was following its planned route toward the money laundering facility. The deception was sophisticated enough to fool casual monitoring, but wouldn't withstand detailed analysis. Miguel had perhaps 4 hours before the cartel's technical staff noticed the irregularities. Next, Miguel disabled the aircraft's transponder, the device that allowed air traffic control to track civilian aircraft. This was more dangerous because it made the plane invisible to commercial aviation, increasing the risk of mid-air collision. But Miguel's destination, the abandoned airfield near Tizamin, was far from commercial flight paths. The risk was acceptable compared to the certainty of capture if the cartel tracked his actual location. The final electronic countermeasure was the most critical. Miguel activated a signal jammer that would prevent his phone from connecting to cellular networks. If the cartel tried to contact him during the flight, they would receive automated messages indicating that he was in a dead zone with no signal coverage. This isolation was both protection and vulnerability. Miguel couldn't communicate with Roberto and Diego to confirm they were in position, but the cartel also couldn't reach him if they discovered Victor's disappearance. Miguel was now flying blind, electronically invisible, toward a destination where success or failure would be determined within the next 2 hours. As the modified GPS coordinates streamed false data to cartel headquarters, Miguel began reviewing the plan that had consumed his life for the past 5 months. As Miguel flew through the morning sky, his mind replayed the conversation that had started this nightmare 2 years earlier. Elena's voice echoed in his memory with devastating clarity. You think you're in control because they pay you well and treat you with respect. But you're not making choices, Miguel. You're just postponing the moment when they decide you're more dangerous alive than dead. Miguel had dismissed Elena's concerns as naive idealism. She was a teacher who didn't understand how the real world worked. The cartel valued his skills too much to ever consider him expendable. But Elena had been right about everything. Miguel remembered their last real conversation, the night before he'd started planning this robbery. Elena had discovered that his latest flight transported assault weapons used in an attack that killed 12 police officers. She'd confronted him in their kitchen, holding newspaper clippings about the massacre. She wanted to know if he understood what his harmless job was really accomplishing. Miguel's response revealed how completely the cartel had corrupted his moral compass. He argued that the police officers were probably corrupt anyway, that cartel violence was inevitable regardless of his involvement, that their family's financial security mattered more than abstract moral principles. Elena had looked at him with a mixture of disappointment and fear. You're not the man I married, Miguel. You're becoming something else, and you don't even see it happening. She'd been trying to save him from exactly the situation he was in now, alone in an airplane with blood on his hands and no way back to the life he'd once lived. But Elena's warnings hadn't stopped Miguel from pursuing cartel money. It had taken something far more visceral to make him understand the danger he was in. It had taken watching a man die for being 15 minutes late. The moment that shattered Miguel's illusions happened 3 months earlier, on a Tuesday morning at the same airfield where Miguel had been recruited. Miguel was preparing for a routine cargo run when he witnessed something that revealed the true nature of his employment. A driver named Carlos Herrera arrived 15 minutes late to pick up a cash shipment. 15 minutes. A minor delay caused by traffic congestion on the highway leading to the airfield. Carlos had worked for the cartel for 3 years. He was reliable, honest, had never stolen a peso or betrayed any confidential information. His only crime was arriving at 7:15 a.m. instead of 7 a.m. Miguel watched from beside his plane as the cartel's operations manager walked up to Carlos's truck. No argument. No explanation. No opportunity for Carlos to explain the delay. A single gunshot to the head. Carlos died instantly, his body slumping over the steering wheel while blood splattered across the windshield. The operations manager turned to the assembled workers and delivered a simple message. Punctuality wasn't a suggestion. It was a survival requirement. Anyone who couldn't meet their obligations with perfect reliability should find employment elsewhere. Then he ordered Miguel to help load Carlos's body into the back of a pickup truck. They would dispose of it in the desert, where it would never be found. As Miguel lifted Carlos's corpse, still warm and bleeding, he finally understood what Elena had been trying to tell him. He wasn't a valued employee. He was a temporarily useful asset whose life expectancy depended entirely on his continued perfection. And perfection, Miguel realized, was impossible to maintain forever. That night, Miguel made the decision that led to this moment. He would steal enough money to disappear forever. But planning the perfect crime required months of preparation, and Miguel had no idea that someone was already watching his every move. As Miguel flew toward Tizimine with Victor's blood still on his hands, he reviewed the plan that had consumed every spare moment of the past 5 months. October 2023. Miguel began by studying every aspect of the cartel's money transport operations with the systematic attention to detail that had made him an exemplary military pilot. The Hermanos del Cielo moved approximately $20 million in cash every month, distributed across multiple flights to minimize the impact of any single loss. Miguel documented 17 different routes, 12 different aircraft, and 43 different personnel involved in money transport operations. He created detailed files on every pilot, guard, and ground crew member. Their schedules, their habits, their personal weaknesses. Miguel learned that Victor Reyes always brought a thermos of coffee on long flights. Guard Captain Eduardo Morales suffered from motion sickness and took medication that made him drowsy. Pilot Luis Herrera had a gambling problem that made him desperate for extra money. Miguel also mapped the cartel's communication protocols. Every flight operated on specific radio frequencies with predetermined check-in times. Missing a communication window would trigger immediate investigation. But Miguel's most important discovery was Flight 47, a monthly cash consolidation run that carried money from 6 different distribution centers to a money laundering operation near the U.S. border. This flight carried the highest value cargo with the least security because it operated within Mexican territory where the cartel controlled local law enforcement. Flight 47 was perfect for Miguel's purposes, but it only occurred once per month. He had 4 opportunities to execute his plan before statistical analysis would reveal patterns in his behavior. November 2023. Miguel began developing the electronic countermeasures that would make his theft undetectable during the critical first hours. Working with Diego's expertise, Miguel learned how to access the aircraft's navigation and communication systems through backdoor software originally designed for maintenance purposes. The cartel's technical security was sophisticated enough to prevent outside intrusion, but it wasn't designed to detect manipulation by authorized personnel. Miguel practiced disabling GPS tracking systems on training aircraft at the airfield where he'd learned to fly civilian planes. He tested signal jammers that would prevent cellular communication without obviously blocking authorized frequencies. He even experimented with spoofing transponder signals to make his aircraft appear to be flying different routes. But the most challenging technical problem was timing. Miguel needed to disable tracking systems precisely 30 minutes into Flight 47 after passing the first mandatory check-in but before reaching the second. This gave him a 90-minute window during which his absence wouldn't be noticed. Miguel spent weeks studying flight patterns and communication schedules until he could execute the electronic deception with his eyes closed. He also began physical preparations. Flying a cargo plane loaded with millions of dollars required different skills than standard passenger flights. Miguel practiced emergency landings on short runways, high-weight takeoffs with unbalanced cargo, and single-pilot operations in aircraft designed for 2-person crews. December 2023. Miguel reconnected with Roberto Guerrero and Diego Morales, 2 childhood friends who'd remained in their hometown while Miguel pursued military service. Roberto specialized in modifying vehicles for clients who needed enhanced performance or concealment capabilities. His shop was located in an industrial area where unusual activity wouldn't attract attention. Roberto had the skills and equipment to prepare the ground transportation Miguel would need. Diego worked as an electronics technician for the municipal government with access to communication equipment and surveillance systems. He understood the technical aspects of Miguel's plan and could provide countermeasures against electronic detection. Neither friend knew the full scope of Miguel's plan. Roberto believed they were planning to steal money from Miguel's employer, but didn't know the amount or specific details. Diego understood he would be providing electronic support, but didn't know when or where the operation would occur. Miguel's recruitment strategy was based on compartmentalization and motivation. He offered each friend enough money to solve their immediate financial problems while withholding information that could compromise the operation if either was captured. Roberto needed $80,000 to save his auto repair business from bankruptcy. Diego wanted $100,000 to pay for his daughter's medical treatment. Miguel promised each man $200,000 for their assistance, enough to transform their lives without making them wealthy enough to attract attention. But Miguel also prepared contingency plans in case either friend betrayed him. He documented their involvement in previous illegal activities, creating insurance that would discourage cooperation with law enforcement. January 2024. Miguel began preparing the operational infrastructure that would support his escape and disappearance. The abandoned airfield near Tizimin had been used for military training during World War II but had been closed since the 1960s. The runway was still serviceable for small aircraft, but the facility was completely off official aviation charts. Miguel visited the airfield 3 times during January, documenting runway conditions, approach patterns, and security considerations. He also identified vehicle access routes and escape paths that would allow rapid departure after landing. Roberto prepared a modified van with hidden compartments for transporting money, plus false registration documents and license plates. The vehicle appeared to be a standard commercial van, but it included armor plating, enhanced engine performance, and electronic countermeasures. Diego created communication equipment that would allow coordination between team members while remaining invisible to law enforcement monitoring. He also prepared false identification documents for all three conspirators. Miguel's most challenging task was creating documentation for his own disappearance. He prepared multiple identity packages, including birth certificates, educational records, and employment histories that would allow him to establish new lives in different countries. But Miguel also planned for the possibility of capture. He created false evidence suggesting he was working for a rival cartel, plus documentation that would redirect investigation away from Roberto and Diego. February 2024. Miguel conducted 3 complete rehearsals of his plan, testing every element from initial theft to final escape. The first rehearsal revealed timing problems with the electronic countermeasures. Miguel's original plan required 2 minutes to disable tracking systems, but his practice runs showed he needed at least 4 minutes to complete the process safely. The second rehearsal exposed communication gaps between team members. Miguel needed real-time coordination with Roberto and Diego, but their radio equipment wasn't compatible with aircraft communication systems. The third rehearsal was executed perfectly, with every element functioning according to plan. Miguel was confident that his operation would succeed if no unexpected complications arose. But Miguel's final week of preparation was focused on psychological readiness. He'd planned a complex crime that required killing or incapacitating anyone who interfered with his escape. Miguel spent hours mentally rehearsing the violence his plan might require. He convinced himself that anyone working for the cartel was complicit in their violence, that stealing from criminals wasn't really theft, that protecting his family justified any necessary actions. Miguel had systematically destroyed his own moral compass to make himself capable of doing whatever survival required. On the 13th of February, Miguel made his final preparations. He said goodbye to Elena without telling her it might be permanent. He loaded his aircraft with equipment that wouldn't appear on any cargo manifest. He activated the electronic systems that would either make him rich or get him killed. By the time Victor mentioned suspicious activity around the airfield, Miguel had already committed to a course of action that couldn't be reversed. During his months of planning, Miguel had identified the perfect target: Flight 47, a monthly cash consolidation run that carried money from 6 different distribution centers to a money laundering operation near the U.S. border. Flight 47 normally carried 2 security guards, but Miguel convinced the operations manager that extra weight would compromise fuel efficiency on the longer route. Instead, the plane would carry only 1 guard, Victor Reyes. Miguel had also prepared detailed modifications to the aircraft's tracking systems. Using information provided by Diego, he'd learned how to disable GPS monitoring while creating false data that would show the plane following its normal route. The plan required precise timing. Miguel would incapacitate Victor 30 minutes into the flight, disable tracking systems, and alter course to a small airfield near Tizimin. The cartel wouldn't realize anything was wrong until the plane failed to arrive at its scheduled destination. Roberto had prepared a modified van with hidden compartments for transporting the money, plus false plates and registration documents. Diego had created electronic jammers that would prevent tracking of their ground transportation. Miguel had also prepared multiple escape routes, backup identities, and contingency plans for every scenario he could imagine. What he hadn't prepared for was betrayal from within his own operation. Miguel's military training had taught him that the key to survival was redundancy. Every critical element of his plan had multiple backups. If the aircraft tracking couldn't be disabled, Miguel had prepared false flight plans that would explain course deviations. If Roberto couldn't secure ground transportation, Miguel had cached supplies and vehicles at 3 different locations. If Diego's electronic countermeasures failed, Miguel had manual backup systems. Miguel had even prepared for the possibility of capture. He'd created false evidence suggesting he was working for a rival cartel, documents that would redirect investigation away from his real motivations and accomplices. But the most important backup plan was psychological. Miguel had spent months preparing himself mentally for the violence his plan might require. He'd convinced himself that anyone working for the cartel was complicit in their violence, that stealing from criminals wasn't really theft, that protecting his family justified any necessary actions. Miguel had systematically destroyed his own moral compass to make himself capable of doing whatever survival required. As Victor's body fell toward the earth 8,000 feet below, Miguel realized his psychological preparation had been devastatingly effective. With Victor dead and the aircraft damaged, Miguel faced the most important decision of his life. He could attempt an emergency landing at the nearest airport, which would mean capture and certain execution by the cartel. Or he could continue toward Tizimine in a damaged aircraft that might not survive the journey. Miguel chose to fly a dying plane toward his only chance of freedom. The approach to Tizimine's abandoned airfield was the most technically challenging flight of Miguel's career. The runway was 4,800 feet of cracked concrete surrounded by dense jungle. No control tower, no emergency services, no margin for error. As Miguel lined up for his final approach, he could see Roberto and Diego waiting beside their van, exactly as planned. But warning lights indicated that only 2 of 3 landing gear wheels had extended properly. Miguel faced another impossible choice: abort the landing and try to reach another airfield, or attempt a crash landing that might kill him and destroy the money. But aborting meant returning to cartel territory with $5.3 million in stolen money. That choice guaranteed death. Miguel committed to the landing. The touchdown was violent but successful. The plane skidded sideways across the runway, throwing up sparks and chunks of concrete, before finally coming to rest in a cloud of dust and smoke. Miguel was battered but alive, and $5.3 million in cash was scattered throughout the cargo compartment, but recoverable. Roberto and Diego rushed to the crashed plane, helping Miguel extract the money while checking for injuries. For a moment, it seemed like the plan had succeeded despite every complication. The 3 friends worked quickly, loading waterproof bags containing $5.3 million into their van. Roberto laughed nervously, commenting that they were now richer than most small countries. Diego monitored radio frequencies, ensuring no one had detected their operation. Miguel felt a surge of relief and accomplishment. 5 months of planning, moments of terror, the death of Victor, all of it had led to this success. They were free, wealthy, and completely invisible to their pursuers. Roberto slapped Miguel on the back, grinning widely. "We did it, hermano. We're free men now." Diego nodded, though his expression seemed more cautious than celebratory. "The tracking systems are clean. No one knows where we are." Miguel was about to respond when his phone buzzed with an incoming message. The photo that appeared on his screen destroyed everything he thought he'd accomplished. Elena, his wife, bound to a chair in what appeared to be a warehouse. Her face was bruised, her lip bleeding, her eyes reflecting pure terror. She was wearing the same blue dress she'd put on that morning to teach at the elementary school. The text message that followed was brief and terrifying. "We know what you're planning. 5.3 million plus 1 million penalty. You have 36 hours. Try anything clever," and she dies slowly. Miguel stared at the phone, his mind racing. How had the cartel discovered his plan? How had they found Elena so quickly? And how could they possibly know about the robbery when it had just happened? Roberto grabbed Miguel's arm, demanding to know what was wrong. When Miguel showed him the photo, Roberto's face went white. But Diego's reaction was different. He studied the message with analytical detachment, examining technical details rather than expressing shock or concern. Miguel realized that his childhood friend's response revealed knowledge he shouldn't possess. Diego's explanation for the cartel's knowledge was technically sophisticated but emotionally unconvincing. He suggested that the cartel had been monitoring all electronic communications in the region, that Miguel's phone calls had been intercepted, that Elena's kidnapping was coincidental timing. But Miguel's military training had taught him to recognize lies under pressure. Diego was avoiding eye contact, providing too much technical detail, offering explanations for questions Miguel hadn't asked. Most importantly, Diego knew too much about cartel capabilities and not enough about their standard procedures. When Diego offered to contact his sources to help locate Elena, Miguel understood the truth. A small-town electronics expert doesn't have sources within major criminal organizations. Diego had revealed his connection to law enforcement without realizing what he'd admitted. The confrontation that followed was brief and decisive. Miguel accused Diego of being an informant. Diego denied the allegations. Roberto demanded an explanation from both of them. Then Diego made his fatal mistake. Faced with Miguel's suspicions and Roberto's questions, he attempted to maintain his cover, by providing information only a law enforcement insider would know. Diego revealed that the DEA had been planning an operation against the cartel's money laundering network. Miguel's robbery had inadvertently interfered with a federal investigation. Miguel realized that Elena's kidnapping wasn't just retaliation for theft. It was part of a larger conflict between the cartel and U.S. law enforcement. Elena was caught in the middle of a war she didn't even know existed. But Diego's betrayal had also provided crucial intelligence. If the DEA was involved, there might be federal agents who could help rescue Elena. Miguel made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He would force Diego to use his law enforcement contacts while planning to eliminate him once Elena was safe. With 35 hours remaining before Elena's deadline, Miguel and Roberto developed a plan that was equal parts rescue operation and suicide mission. They would create fake money bundles using newspaper wrapped in genuine currency, making packages appear legitimate during casual inspection. The real money would be hidden in a secure location while they attempted to trade worthless paper for Elena's life. Roberto found an abandoned aircraft hangar near the airfield, a structure built during the 1940s for military training but unused for decades. They buried the real money in hermetically sealed containers beneath a concrete slab in the hangar's floor. Diego was forced to use his DEA contacts to gather intelligence about Elena's location. The information he provided suggested she was being held at a ranch compound 40 miles from Tizamín, in territory controlled by the Hermanos del Cielo cartel. But Miguel knew the cartel would verify the money before releasing Elena. The fake bundles would buy them perhaps 15 minutes before the deception was discovered. 15 minutes to rescue Elena and escape with their lives. Miguel understood that this rescue attempt would likely end in death for everyone involved. But Elena was the only person who'd ever mattered more to him than his own survival. If saving her required dying in a gunfight with cartel enforcers, Miguel was prepared to make that sacrifice. The meeting location was a remote ranch house surrounded by desert scrubland, exactly the kind of isolated terrain where people disappeared forever. Miguel and Roberto arrived with 2 duffel bags containing fake money bundles and weapons hidden throughout their vehicle. They'd prepared for a rescue operation disguised as a ransom payment. The cartel's delegation consisted of 4 men, including the operations manager, who'd executed Carlos Herrera for being 15 minutes late. Miguel recognized him immediately and understood that this man would kill Elena, regardless of whether the ransom was paid. Elena was brought out of the ranch house, her hands bound behind her back, her face showing the effects of 2 days of captivity and interrogation. She was alive, but clearly terrified. The operations manager explained the terms. The cartel wanted $6.3 million, the original $5.3 million plus $1 million penalty for Miguel's betrayal. When Miguel explained that he only had $5.3 million, the operations manager smiled and suggested that Elena's remaining value would cover the difference. Miguel understood that the cartel never intended to release Elena alive. This wasn't a ransom exchange, it was an execution disguised as a business transaction. The operations manager ordered one of his men to verify the money, while another held a gun to Elena's head. Miguel had approximately 90 seconds before the fake money was discovered and everyone at the ranch was killed. But Miguel had spent 5 months preparing for this moment, and he'd prepared for the possibility that negotiation would fail. The signal was Roberto starting the van's engine, a sound Miguel had been waiting for throughout the tense negotiation. Miguel dove behind their vehicle as Roberto opened fire with an AK-47 rifle hidden in the cargo area. The first 3-round burst killed the 2 cartel members standing beside the ranch house, their bodies dropping instantly as 7.6 2mm bullets tore through their chests. The operations manager and his remaining enforcer scrambled for cover behind a concrete water tank, returning fire with handguns that were outmatched by Roberto's military-grade weapon. But the gunfire had triggered the crisis Miguel feared most. Elena was caught in the crossfire, still bound and unable to run for safety. She lay pressed against the ground beside the ranch house steps, 20 yards of open ground away from Miguel's position. Miguel drew his own pistol, a .40 caliber Glock he'd carried during his military service, and began laying down covering fire while sprinting toward Elena's position. The enforcer's bullets shattered the ground around Miguel's feet as he ran. One round passed close enough to his head that he felt the pressure wave against his ear. Another punched through the sleeve of his jacket without touching skin. Miguel reached Elena as the operations manager was drawing a larger pistol to execute her. The cartel leader had decided that if he couldn't collect his ransom, he would at least send a message about what happened to people who stole from his organization. The hand-to-hand combat that followed was the most intense physical confrontation of Miguel's life. The operations manager was shorter than Miguel, but heavier and more experienced in close-quarters violence. He'd killed dozens of people with his hands and understood how to use weapons in confined spaces. Miguel's first priority was controlling the operations manager's gun hand. He grabbed the man's wrist as the pistol was being raised toward Elena's head, preventing a shot that would have killed her instantly. But the operations manager responded by drawing a curved knife from his belt with his free hand. The blade was designed for butchering, with a 6-inch edge that could open major arteries with minimal pressure. For 30 seconds, they fought for control of both weapons while Elena watched in terror from the ground beside them. Miguel had height and reach advantages, but the operations manager had experience and desperation. The knife cut through Miguel's left forearm, opening a gash that bled heavily but missed major arteries. Miguel responded by slamming his knee into the operations manager's ribs, cracking bone and forcing the man to gasp for breath. Miguel gained control of the pistol by biting the operations manager's gun hand until he released it. The weapon fell to the ground, but the operations manager still held the knife and was using it to slash at Miguel's neck and face. The fight ended when Miguel managed to wrap his arm around the operations manager's neck from behind. Using a blood choke he'd learned in military training, Miguel cut off blood flow to the man's brain until he lost consciousness. But Miguel didn't stop when the operations manager went limp. The fury and terror of the past 36 hours erupted into homicidal rage. Miguel continued choking until he was certain the man was dead, then continued for another 30 seconds to be absolutely sure. When Miguel finally released his grip, the operations manager's face was purple and his eyes were open but sightless. Miguel cut Elena's bonds with the operations manager's knife, his hands shaking from adrenaline and blood loss. Elena was conscious but deeply traumatized, unable to speak coherently or walk without assistance. Roberto's covering fire had eliminated the remaining enforcer, but they could hear vehicles approaching in the distance. The cartel's backup team was arriving with automatic weapons in overwhelming numbers. Miguel carried Elena to their van while Roberto provided suppressive fire from behind the concrete water tank. They had perhaps 3 minutes before the ranch was surrounded by cartel reinforcements. "Can you drive?" Roberto shouted over the gunfire. Miguel's left arm was bleeding heavily from the knife wound, but he could still use both hands. "I can drive, you keep shooting." The escape from the ranch became a high-speed chase across 30 miles of desert roads. 3 cartel vehicles pursued them, firing automatic weapons through their windshields while trying to ram Miguel's van off the road. Roberto had modified their van with armor plating that stopped small arms fire, but the protective steel added weight that reduced their speed advantage. Miguel pushed the engine to its limits while Roberto returned fire through the rear windows. The chase reached speeds of over 90 miles per hour on roads designed for farm equipment. Miguel used every evasive driving technique he'd learned in military training, while Roberto's rifle fire gradually reduced the number of pursuit vehicles. One cartel truck crashed when Roberto's bullets shattered the driver's windshield. Another fell behind when its engine overheated from sustained high-speed operation. The final pursuit vehicle stayed with them until they reached the abandoned hangar where the real money was hidden. But as Miguel turned into the access road, Roberto's last magazine of ammunition disabled the truck's engine with a sustained burst of automatic fire. Miguel parked behind the hangar while Roberto covered the approach road with his rifle. They could see headlights in the distance, more cartel vehicles approaching their position. But they could also hear the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the north. Miguel realized that Diego's DEA contacts had finally responded to the crisis. At the hangar, Miguel and Roberto recovered the hidden money, while Elena waited in the van, traumatized by her captivity and the violence she'd witnessed. But as they loaded the containers, Miguel received a phone call that changed everything. Diego was calling with urgent information. Federal agents were en route to the hangar, having triangulated their location through GPS tracking on his phone. Miguel had 2 minutes to escape before the hangar was surrounded by federal agents who would arrest him for robbery, kidnapping, murder, and a dozen other felonies. Diego offered Miguel a deal: surrender to federal custody in exchange for witness protection and immunity from prosecution. Miguel's response was simple: he'd rather die free than live in prison. Roberto started the van while Miguel made his final decision. He would disappear completely, taking Elena and the money to a place where neither the cartel nor the federal government could find them. The chase that followed involved both cartel vehicles and federal agents converging on the hangar as Miguel's van raced toward the coast. Roberto had prepared an escape route that neither group anticipated, a fishing boat waiting at a remote beach on the Caribbean coast. The van reached the coastline just as their pursuers arrived at the hangar. Miguel, Elena, and Roberto transferred to the boat with their money and disappeared into international waters. Behind them, federal agents and cartel members engaged in a firefight that left 18 people dead and the hangar burning. 3 weeks later, FBI investigators found evidence of the massacre at the ranch where Elena had been held, plus the burned hangar and abandoned van. 18 bodies total. Millions of dollars in destroyed evidence. Signs of coordinated battles between law enforcement and criminal organizations. But no trace of Miguel Santos, Elena Vasquez, or Roberto Guerrero. The $5.3 million stolen from the cartel was never recovered. Diego Morales provided detailed information about Miguel's planning, but had never been told about escape routes or final destinations. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.